there were definitely a couple of really awkward moments in that. But if you sort of summarise what was the actual thrust of it, in essence, I think what we saw there was effectively across the committee, be it Conservative or Labour, SNP, Lib Dem MPs, I think what you saw was a sense of incredulity that Boris Johnson was arguing what he was arguing. And I think Harriet Harman really summed it up towards the end, where she said, if I was going 100 miles per hour and saw the speedometer saying 100 miles an hour, it would be a bit odd if I said somebody assured me I wasn't going that fast, because it's what you see with your own eyes. So there's a view within the committee, and it was repeated again and again and again, about how could you say this was in guidance and rules when you were at events which, when we look at the evidence, it doesn't look like that. And then his defence, in essence, was these were work events, and when social distancing wasn't observed, that was because the nature of the environment in number 10, the nooks and crannies, the small rooms in which we operate. But there were moments where, as you said, Mark, that fell down in evidence. One of them was about the leave-in do. He was particularly questioned on the Lee Kane, his former director of comms, leave-in do by Bernard Jenkins that wasn't socially distanced. A number of people gathered in a room. The Prime Minister made the defence of, well, we did do social distancing. We did use social distancing mechanisms in other parts of the building, talking about screens, etc., in other parts of the building. But this social gathering was necessary for work events. And then Bernard, with the killer question, really was, well, if you're at the podium at a coronavirus press conference, would you have advised people to have organisations who are allowed to have unsocially distanced leave-in do's? No. And then the other thing I thought was really awkward was the bring your own bottle party or event in the garden. And he said, well, yes, Lee Kane said the optics look bad, but it wasn't breaking the rules. That was a bit confusing. Well, if the optics are bad, isn't it because it is breaking guidance or rules? And he said to that, I thought it was a work event, but I appreciate, Jill, you said it, the kind of does it pass the look over the wall test, that if a member of public had looked over the wall, what they saw would be something that they thought that they were perhaps banned from doing. And I think that was the closest admission we got to from the former Prime Minister, that he acknowledged that this looked really bad. But all the while he said, I didn't think the rules were broken. I was amazed by the fixed penalty notices. I was amazed to get one myself. And it was all in the context of everything we did in Downing Street was related to work, essential for work. But there are a couple of moments in that committee where it was really uncomfortable for him to keep arguing that, and I'm not sure the committee was convinced.
So was there a so-called smoking gun moment, or is it more the cumulative impact of what he was saying?
I didn't see a smoking gun in that where you thought he has been pinned down, but I do think the issues around some of the evidence that advisers gave and the way he argued in Parliament was uncomfortable, be it the optics of that bring your own bottle party, or indeed some of the Reynolds advice, his principal private secretary saying, I don't think you should go into the Commons and say guidance was followed at all times, because it actually, I don't think we can argue that. But his defence again was, in a perfect world, it wasn't, but in the round, I thought we tried the best we could. So he had a ready defence. I think two issues come out of it. Is one, as I said, the committee seemed unconvinced, I thought, by his evidence, but also he seemed to suggest at the end that if the committee didn't find in his favour, he would not think that that was a fair outcome. And I think that raises questions in itself, because, you know, there has been all these issues around MPs saying it's a kangaroo court and is it prejudicial against him? And he didn't, in that moment where he was going through that testimony and that cross-examination, really accept the legitimacy of the committee, which I think for many MPs watching that, they will feel quite annoyed by that.
And what did you feel about his demeanour throughout that? It was quite, defiant, quite angry at one time.
I think he went through waves where he got a bit tetchy with Bernard Jenkins and began to try and interrupt him, and I think that played quite badly for Johnson. But I think towards the end he kind of regained his control. And he was only really, in terms of the answers, I thought there was 2 or 3 moments where he was stumped. One was, really, it was when the evidence was put to him about conflictual advice that he was given. He also didn't seem to be able to say where this advice had come from, because actually in the documentary evidence, the advice from his Director of Comms, Jack Doyle, his Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, and then his Principal Private Secretary, Martin Reynolds, there are 3 pieces of evidence in the documentation suggesting that they didn't advise him that guidance and rules were followed at all times, and yet he's saying my advisors did, and that's part of his defence. But I do think that in terms of the presentation, I know what you think, Jill, he came across as sincerely believing his argument. That was very clear.